All right, I'm Andros. I'm one of the co-founders of Wonderverse, where we build sort of the coordination layer to help Web3 projects succeed. I'm also one of the co-founders of Stems DAO, where we work with musicians to make music with their favorite artists through stems, NFTs, and remixes. But today, specifically, we're here to talk about coordination. So to give a little bit of context on Wonderverse, we help sort of Web3 teams manage their governance, their operations, and their payment flows. So helping them manage proposals, manage projects, manage contributors, helping contributors find new opportunities, helping them sort of like earn reputation, etc. To date, we've worked with over 200 Web3 organizations, including like Gitcoin, DYDX, Radical, Bankless, Polygon DAO, etc. And we have almost 19,000 contributors on the platform. So, in our journey in building Wonderverse, in talking with thought leaders, in traveling to all the never-ending like travel conferences, meeting with all of you, we've aggregated some lessons which might be useful for us building in Web3 to sort of build for the future. And so we're going to take the top 10 and see if they're useful. So, oh shit, okay. It's slightly cut off. But anyway, firstly, most of the successful organizations that we talk with have a very clear mission. So because we're in a very distributed, a very decentralized kind of world, members of an organization need to really define their goals, their values, and even the specific vibe or meme that like we have, right? So at Wonderverse, we kind of help teams construct their roadmaps, construct their sort of milestones, so that on both like an organizational level and on the pod level, there's kind of buy-in, right? We'll discuss what pods are in a little bit. But having a good understanding of these empowers sort of the community to steer the organization in a kind of unified way instead of like multiple factions pulling people in multiple directions. And of course, this is beneficial for onboarding new contributors. Nouns DAO is a great example of this. They have so many spin-off projects, but because their values are so clear, everyone is able to act and vote in a very nounish way. So for example, placing emphasis on like, cutting edge experimentation, on decentralization, and increasing value for like kind of noun holders. And of course, these directions are kind of like dynamic. And it's important to realign though once these goals and kind of values change. For example, Gitcoin successfully went from being like an open sourced bounty and payment platform to funding public goods and becoming a grants protocol. And then once the values and missions are defined, we can focus on running it. I think like a Web3 decentralized organization can generally be deconstructed into 4 dimensions, each of which like represent their own kind of sets of problems. I want to shout out Sion Ha from Meta Cartel as this was part of a conversation that we had, as he's writing a book on DAOs, and as a result of us working with our kind of partners as well. So as crypto natives, we kind of like to dive deep into crypto economics to tokenomics, but really that's just like half the battle, right? Like, in a Web3 org, we're immediately dealing with remote work, for example. And unless we're dealing with specific local chapters, like, ATX DAO, which, is a DAO for people in Austin, contributors are normally spread around the globe. They are in different time zones, they speak different languages, and so like a global diverse team will actually make it so that as many people in the community are served. And then secondly, obviously the beauty of our own space is the multitude of governance modes. So from the Moloch DAO to more social DAOs like FWB, C Club, investment DAOs like Pleaser, protocols like Uniswap, and product DAOs like Juicebox. You kind of have this idea that like you can figure out what your values are, and then you can pick the right sort of governance mode, right? Interestingly though, this is possible kind of on the DAO and the sub DAO level. So for example, in Bankless, how Fight Club VC, kind of their VC sub-DAO is governed is very different to how Bankless Consulting is governed, which is very different to how like Bankless Africa is governed, for example. And then thirdly, different types of organizations will need different types of tokenomics. These range from not having a token, a non-monetized soul-bound token, NFTs, liquid ERC20 tokens. There's many ways to accrue value. I won't dive too deeply into like tokenomics here, but C Club, which we're a part of, always have advocated for like a simple to understand utility and like simple to understand model, just because a core part of Web3 is that contributors get paid in DAO native tokens. So when they get paid, they need to understand like how they have equity in the network. They need to understand how they're able to contribute. And then lastly, and definitely not least, we need to think about community. Your community are your fans, they're your users, they're your contributors, they're your investors. And so it's so important not to only like sort of align with them, but it's also important for your community members to build relationships with each other. And so that kind of leads into our third lesson. Structure is not the enemy. I think a lot of times we confuse structure with hierarchy, but really, even a flat hierarchy is a type of structure. And depending on your 4 dimensions, you want to pick the right kind of structures. And you'll need to get community, for example, right? Like if your kind of DAO is, you don't need efficiency as much, but you need to be very fair, you need to be very censorship resistant, then you'll want a flatter hierarchy. You'll want a more decentralized hierarchy. But if you're building a product, you might want core working groups where the leaders get voted in and out, kind of like, the Spartan Council from Synthetics, like the Index Coops, Pods, Nests, and Wise Owls. That might work better. But in any case, the clarity of an organization, brings transparency for the community so they know what to really expect. And again, that leads to our 4th lesson, ownership is essential. I know this sounds super scary to, our libertarian heart, but when I say ownership, I really just mean like responsibility and accountability. So in flatter sort of structures, contributors don't have a manager. So to ensure like people are still creating good quality work, right, we need to make them accountable. People who consistently create positive impact should, get more responsibility. They should have more equity in the network. And on the vice versa, people who are providing negative impact on the DAO or like providing no value should either get offboarded or they should, just get less and less responsibility, right? Lesson number 5: not everything needs to be on chain. As some people have spoken, like about already, voter apathy and low voter turnout is a real problem, especially when there's like an overflow of kind of proposals. And also the on-chain vote normally takes a long time. It involves like multiple stakeholders. And so, for us, we think that to reduce the burden on the community, like smaller things like, specific feature requirements, specific design changes, onboarding processes, like these can really be kind of, implemented or voted on by smaller corresponding teams, and kind of like closed off-chain voting is also important because a lot of times in on-chain votes, if more influential people vote one way, contributors are more likely to vote another. And this is kind of a diagram that we took from one of our partners, LivePeer, where they do a temp check first on social consensus. Once like they get enough buy-in from the community, then they can perhaps go into like an on-chain vote. And that leads into our lesson 6, which is really important, pods. So what are pods? They're originally coined by our friends at Metropolis, formerly known as Orca. So pods are kind of like the building blocks of like a Web3 organization, right? They can be your functional teams like engineering, your design, sort of pods or teams. They can be vertical based. They can be like your investment arm or your consulting arm. Or they can just be around a project, right? Like DevCon, for example, preparing for DevCon. And so pods give sort of autonomy to more agile teams, which are kind of like trying to achieve their goals. They set clear paths for contributors. A designer will join the design pod, an engineer will join the engineering pod, right? And if we also think about pods like sub-DAOs with their own treasury, then really like we can do more experimentation. It's easier to spin up and wind down pods and sub-DAOs than it is obviously to wind down and spin up a completely different organization. And so on Monoverse, each pod has its own kind of workspace, its own kind of roles and wallets, so that teams can run as autonomously as possible. And then lesson 7, governance, operations, and payment modes are all related. So this is true kind of on the org level and on the pod level. So, for teams building products, execution and speed is important, right? So the governance should be more focused on letting core teams build, and then you'll run the agile operations, you'll run sprints, and then you'll need to incentivize people to build very efficiently. So you can either use Coordinate, or like you can kind of like have a more stable sort of payroll or salary, so people can get buy-in. But for community teams, right, vibe and culture is more important. So flatter hierarchies and bounties might be better. And using Wonder, you can kind of see like we have like, it's very blurred here, but basically like, you know, you can create a proposal, people can vote on it on platform or snapshot. Once it's approved, it can get turned into like a task or a project, and then, you know, you can batch pay out the tasks on our platform, or you can feed it into Utopia or Coordinate. And let's see, lesson 8. This is a fun one. Onboarding, leveling up, and gamification. So when a user joins Discord, any Discord really, they're a lot of the time immediately overwhelmed. There's a lot of information, and this normally leads them to leave. So documentation on roadmaps, on FAQs, on your specific milestones, it's really important to give context on how people can get involved, right? And so we kind of enable adding documentation on the organizational and on the pod level to get people ramped up. And as mentioned before, like people need to be able to level up. They need to be able to step up and become leaders. And so as contributors create more tasks and they reach like a certain threshold, they can then be moved to roles with more responsibility. We've kind of built Wonderverse to have a very nuanced permissioning system. Each role can do very fine-grained things like creating tasks, reviewing things, paying people, spinning up pods, and these can be connected to Discord or token gated. And the ideal state of all this is to make it feel like a game, to make work be fun, and to make like contributing in Web3 feel like a game. So not only will apps like us need to create like a gamified experience, but at the same time, orgs need to like create a mechanism to make sort of contribution feel like fun. We've been doing a lot of research and work into this, so keep watching this space, or if you have any thoughts, please let us know. And then lesson number 9, create an engaged community. This is really hard, I can't lie. We haven't really quite cracked this as a space. As I mentioned, orgs need to really make sure that community members connect with each other, but also aligning with your own missions, your own values. At the core of the issue, right, people want to be heard. They want their ideas to matter. And we found that proposals, bottom-up proposals, are a great way to foster discussions and to introduce new ideas. But it is important to have specific guidelines on what proposals should be written, like how you can write proposals. Otherwise, you'll just get a ton of different kind of like half-written, half-thought-out proposals, which aren't useful to anyone. And then another way to engage community is, of course, creating a culture, creating memes. Think of the 3 threes from Olympus DAO. Think of, punks follow punks. So in this way, meme competitions, content bounties are a great way to engage. And on Wonderverse, we've seen a lot of communities band together to, create videos, create content, and to actually like discuss around proposals as well. And then the final lesson is really just more like a lesson around thinking about tools. If a process can be automated, it probably should be. We're in a point in a space where tools can solve a lot of problems. But if the tools don't exist for your specific workflow, I think you should build it. Coordinate came out of Yearn, Gnosis Save came out of Gnosis. And the beauty of a DAO is that you can create a sub-DAO or a pod to build the tool that works for you. And then if it's generalized, if it can be generalized, other people can use it. And then, of course, there's also a lot of thinking or chat about all-in-one tools, reducing burnout, things like that. But when we think of even traditional companies, which are normally less complex than DAOs, like, do they have a single tool which manages everything? No. But what we can move towards is this kind of like interoperability of tools, right? So data can be shared with a single user tied to a specific wallet, and they can enjoy sort of the benefits of integrations at every level of the stack, from like Gnosis to Snapshot to Discord to us, Utopia, Coordinate, Govern, etc., and so on. this is just like, that's the end of all the lessons. There's just a slide to show us a little bit more. If I haven't done enough in this presentation, our content lead will be mad if I don't add this. So just putting it out there. And then finally, if you're interested in sort of participating in or just jamming on the future of coordination, please check out our app. You can sign up as a contributor. You can create your own workspace, test it out, or you can hit me up on Twitter or Telegram. I've gone very Web 2 and not included a QR code, which is my bad. But yeah, just hit us up. I think we have some time for some questions. If anyone has any questions, let me know.
So you were talking about community, and I think that our problem is that we're using community as a catch-all term. So the memes and culture is important, but it isn't important to achieving projects and goals, right? And so Wonderverse focuses on project management. So what are your thoughts on redefining community to mean community and workforce to be workforce? So contributors are not considered contributors, but they're considered a workforce. And what that comes with is that there's an intention for an incentive that is based on compensation. And community is more on an alignment of like goals and values and vibes. And so I don't know if you've seen that kind of problem in the ways that people have been managing their tasks in this like merge of community and workforce, which means contributors, by the way.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the question is sort of understanding where the lines blur between like your community, who's kind of just there to hang out and to like have fun and to, you know, give their thoughts on things, to sort of people who work for the organization, work for the project. They actually like code, or they, you know, design, or they work on product. I think, you know, I unfortunately couldn't find the right diagram, but there's like, I think 1KX has this really beautiful diagram of concentric circles where like the core team is in the middle, and then you have like the contributors, core contributors on the outer ring, and then you can kind of have like community on the most outer ring. The idea is that you'll always have people who are just gonna be there to hang out. I think if people want to, though, like some people like, you know, they'll start vibing, they might develop relationships with each other. And what we found is that like they start by submitting a meme and they're like, whoa, I got paid for this. Like maybe I should do a little bit more. And, you know, that's kind of how they get sucked in. And that's kind of related to this kind of gamification, right? Where you can be a level 1 contributor where you just get to create proposals, you get to submit things to bounties. And then as you like get more and more successful, you actually move up in the organization. So I think having that really clear is how you can have this kind of separation between like community who are just there to have fun, and then people who are there to actually like work and like, you know, be productive, quote unquote.
I got 2 questions. We'll go easy then hard. What I think is interesting about a lot of the things I Wonder is working on is how a contributor interacts with multiple boards. Do you have like any insights about on average how many like boards or pods or whatever one contributor is a part of, and like is there an optimal amount that we have found or that Wonder has found?
What was the second question? Oh, okay. God, I'm dreading some questions from Aaron. But I think like what we found is that on average, people are part of 2. That's normally, on Wonderverse at least. Oh, we're talking about orgs. And then with pods, you know, then I think like either part, like I think 2 or 3, like sometimes they're part of 3. If you're a designer, you could be part of product or just on like a project pod. But right now, I think also there's not enough projects on one, like if you're, think about Discord, right? Like everyone I'm sure is in, you know, 100. But obviously with us, it's like a little bit more focus on like you're actually working or contributing in a sort of way. But I think, you know, maybe as we see more and more organizations on Wonderverse, like you can kind of see more and more. But right now, it's like on average, it's about 2. Okay.
Let's like a different way of asking a question is if like you have 100 members in a DAO, what percentage of those contributors are using Wonderverse as the place for asking or working? I'm curious, like I'm just kind of curious about the lines of integration within a DAO.
That's a great question. So what's interesting, so the question is like, if there are 100 contributors, how many of them are like actively contributing, to a project on Oneverse or whatever kind of, maybe kind of like project management-y kind of tool? I would say 100 contributors is quite a lot, I would say. And we're talking about active core contributors, right? Not just like on the periphery, or we talk about any, okay. Well, for DAOs with 100 contributors, I think it really depends on their governance, actually. If they're like very bottoms up, they write loads of proposals, and their whole org is using Wonderverse, then like, we work with a Korean DAO called agov. They have, I think, like at least 300 contributors on Wonder. There's like every single proposal has like 50 or so comments or discussion topics. Sorry, it's this one. agov from Korea. But it really depends. For a lot of bigger DAOs, we actually just work with specific pods. So we'll work with a specific team, which has like 5 to 10 people. And then if it's useful for them, they'll like sort of make it work with another pod, which also has about 5 to 10 people. I think, so it doesn't really answer the question, but it's kind of like, it depends on how they're governed. If they're like very decentralized and the whole organization is using it, it could be the whole 100 people, right? If it's more like, oh, we just need this for the content pod or like the engineering pod, then it's just those kind of pods, right? Does anyone? Oh, okay.
Well, all right. So to follow up to what we were just talking about, do you find, if we talk about the way that core contributors are contributing to different DAOs, do you find that still aligns with how Wonder thinks that DAOs will grow? Like if I was like, yo, Wonder, what is your vision of what a DAO is going to look like in 10 years? Do you think that the way that DAO contributors are currently and core contributors are working still aligns with that, or adjustments you've had to make? And then second question is, given your experiences with these DAOs you've been working on, what is a feature that you thought was going to enable DAOs to like get to a next level of value that you've had to sunset or you pulled back on? Yeah, you took out.
So I'll answer the second question first. So we actually have like a pretty well-built feed system that we thought was like going to be really useful for organizations, especially when it comes to like giving kudos. Like whenever you complete something, it could get put into a feed, but it actually didn't drive it that like I don't think DAOs are ready yet to consistently like check on a feed. Not people are like looking at all the work that gets done quite yet. I think if we build better notification systems, maybe that could change, or just like more interesting items on the feed rather than just like, oh, you completed something. But that's something that we thought was going to be a huge unlock. But we're still playing with that. And then the first question is like, it's kind of like our vision of where it's going to go versus now, right? Like what is actually happening. I think our vision is pretty similar to yours. I think like everyone is going to work for like maybe 2 or 3 like Web3 organizations, and what we're trying to do is make it really easy for contributors to sort of work on multiple things at once. We kind of have this like mission control thing where you can see all the projects and tasks that you have across like different orgs that you're a part of. But I think right now, actually, like especially in this kind of bear market where core contributors are just trying to focus on one thing, like a lot of people are actually just working for one org right now, and so they're spending all their time there. But the future with what we imagine is like, maybe I'm working on like 2 or 3 things maximum. I get paid in DAO native tokens by like all 3 of them, or like 2 out of 3, or whatever it might be. Anyone else have any other questions? Whew. Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone.